8-hour time-restricted eating is linked to a 91% higher risk of cardiovascular death. If you type intermittent fasting into Google, this is the first article that will come up when related to cardiovascular health. These figures are staggering. Stay tuned to this episode to find out how accurate this statement actually is. Hi everyone and welcome back to the Chemist Couple podcast with your hosts Jess and Lee. For those of you who are new to the channel, we are, like I say, Jess and Lee, and we are both clinical pharmacists working in GP practices in the northwest of England. We release a weekly podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and then also over here on YouTube. So if you're watching, hi. And we basically discuss a range of different health topics with the aim of trying to find the perfectly balanced lifestyle for not only us, but also for our listeners. So if you, like I say, if you're new here, then please subscribe to the channel as it really helps us. And let's get into the episode. So intermittent fasting and cardiovascular health or disease.
Well, we're going to try and relate a lot of the podcasts in the future to cardiovascular disease, aren't we? Yeah,
I think it's a very hot topic and I think people are very interested in it. It's obviously the biggest killer worldwide still. So, you know, it is a real big problem. And the important thing about it is that it is very preventable.
It is. I looked at some stats before to see how quickly and how often deaths are occurring in the UK and the US.
Okay, yeah.
So 1 in every 3 minutes in the UK and 1 in every 33 seconds in the US relating to cardiovascular disease.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, we have first-hand experience of when you just said the 1 in every 3 minutes, it just sort of reminded me of your dad when obviously he had the heart attack when we were here. And so it's terrifying because I think what we tend to do in healthcare especially is we see figures on a computer or in front of you on a screen, and you don't really fully comprehend what they mean. And by that I mean you can see, you know, a patient's record and it'll say a heart attack. For that person, it's such a life-changing thing to have happened, and I think we really need to understand that and emphasise that on this podcast, that 1 in every 3 minutes a person is having some cardiovascular event, which in the UK, which is impacting not only that person but their family hugely, you know, so it is a real big problem.
It is.
I just thought it was important to highlight that.
No, that's a good thing.
Okay, so intermittent fasting, it's a term that's probably become more popular over the last few years, but we have been actually practicing it for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, a lot of religions do so, don't they?
Yeah. So what does it actually mean? So there are several types, but the 3 most common, which we will discuss now, are time-restricted eating, alternate day fasting, and also periodic fasting.
Okay.
So do you want to explain a little bit about what the different types?
Well, time-restricted eating is one that's become more popular. So that's where you condense your feeding window. So with the 8 and 16, meaning you feed within 8 hours and then you have a 16-hour fast. That doesn't put any restrictions on your energy intake. Yeah. So you still eat the same meals you would throughout the day, but you put it within a shorter window. Yeah. Alternate day fasting is, well, I've looked into it in 2 different ways. So there's the one where you can water fast on one day and then the next day you just eat as normal. Mm-hmm. And then there's ones where you class fasting as a reduced energy intake. So I think it's 40% of what you would normally...
Yeah, I've seen 25%.
25, okay.
Yeah, so 20. I think it's just reducing your calories on alternate days, isn't it? But like you say, with the difference between time-restricted eating and alternate day fasting, alternate day is more focused on the caloric intake.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Which we will discuss in a sec. And then periodic fasting.
Do you mean the 5-2?
Sorry. Yeah, or I just mean in terms of, so if you're, well, I meant in terms of, we don't like to use calories on this channel, do we? Or we don't like to talk about calories in terms of, we understand that the calorie model is, you know, the way that you will lose weight or you will lose energy is by consuming less than what you expend. However, the calorie model in
terms of health,
health.
What I meant in the 5-2 is you fast for 5 days, eat for 2 days, or the other way around.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. And then periodic fasting is just longer periods of fasting, so usually 24 to 72 hours. I think that one is probably the one that I would say if you are going to do fasting or if you're going to practice intermittent fasting, I would seek advice from that one because it probably carries a higher risk if you go in 72 hours without eating anything, which is what these fasts tend to be, where you're just consuming obviously water. You know, we know that refeeding syndrome, which is a real issue where your body can actually go into, it's really dangerous, isn't it? If you just, don't eat for so long and then all of a sudden start eating calories again or start eating food. And And so, like I say, I would definitely get advice from a health professional if you are going to do that type. So now we know the different types of fasting. I wanted to know what you would do. So do you intermittent fasting? If you were, would there be a certain type of fasting that you would do out of those three?
At the moment, I don't. I did do for the period last year, and I'd done the time restricted eating, so 8 hours feed and 16 hours fast.
Yeah.
I found it to be beneficial, and that was also supported by my blood tests and lipid profile, glycemic control, because I've got diabetes, for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I am going to sort of implement again. But then we'll go on to, I believe the window can change for practicality reasons.
Yeah.
What about yourself?
I agree. I used to, and then I think we just enjoy our morning coffee too much, and unfortunately at the moment we don't like black coffee, so we have it with milk. So in terms of actually eating, we do fast in that sense because we don't eat, but we do have milk in the morning, and so that is the only reason why we don't practice intermittent fasting at the moment, is because we enjoy our coffee too much.
Yeah, and we just asked each other as if we don't live with each other and know exactly when we eat.
I know, but I think, like you say, time restricted eating is probably the most widely practiced because it's the easiest to do. It doesn't mean that you're restricting yourself on one day or another. It's easy to incorporate into your daily routine for most people, and so that's probably the most widely used. That is the one that we would do going forward, which we'll get to the end of the podcast and see if we are going to intermittent fast or not. But I was thinking about alternate day fasting. That may be beneficial for other people. So if you work night shifts or different types of shifts, then it might be easier for you to fast on 2 days or 3 days when you've potentially got a shift or whatever. So again, it's very individual to each different person. And I think with anything, I would just look into it a little bit more if you are thinking about doing it, to see which one is the most beneficial for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first way that intermittent fasting may impact heart health, from what the studies are suggesting, is weight loss.
Which one do you want to go through first? Are we looking at time restricted eating for this, or just general as an umbrella
just
term?
In general, because I don't know whether you found anything on specific types of intermittent fasting, but I personally didn't. So it was just intermittent fasting in general. Did you find?
I know. I mean, some of the studies did go against intermittent fasting for weight loss, but then when you actually look at these studies, a lot of them were sort of cohort based, and a lot of them were retrospective self-reporting studies. So as you know, if you phone someone up a day later and said, when did you eat yesterday and what did you eat? There's a good chance of there being a big error in what you're reporting. So I think that's why there was no significance in some studies, and they were normally 10-hour feeding windows.
Okay. But then in other studies, then it did show that intermittent fasting does lead to weight loss.
And physiologically it does make sense.
Well, yeah, does it? In terms of like you eating less.
To weight loss, I mean, it makes sense to fast and lose weight.
Okay.
Did you not agree with that?
Well, in terms of what mechanism? So
when you eat, as we know, classes a fed state, we're spiking insulin. We're keeping basal levels of insulin throughout the body. Insulin's an anabolic hormone, probably one of the most anabolic that we've got. And then if you remove the need to feed and use insulin, then you're going to go into a catabolic state. So you've got to use your own energy stores, which is something we've developed from primates at one point, wasn't it? So if you're in a catabolic state, you've got to use energy stores. Weight will reduce with that. That's what I meant in terms of. I know it come about in a weird way, but that's what I mean.
No, that's fine. No, it does make sense. And I think as well, if you are sort of intermittent fasting, then the consensus would be that you're potentially going to eat less than what you would on a normal day because you've restricted your time. Although we do say to eat the same amount of it or consume the same amount of energy in that period of time, which is why I was getting a bit confused, because I was thinking, is it a two-pronged approach where it's the catabolism but also the fact that you are consuming less energy? But yeah, so weight loss, obviously, we know is important in a lot of different things, and we can affect blood pressure. Obviously, the risk of obesity decreases, and as we know, obesity is a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So yeah, losing weight during intermittent fasting would be a benefit to overall cardiovascular health.
Yeah, I know we've discussed previously that weight is not the best surrogate marker for health, but in general terms, a lot of people who are overweight, they are basically storing excess fat. So if you are going to reduce that, it's going to have beneficial effects throughout the whole body. Like you said, lowered blood pressure. I think that's one of the biggest risks to cardiovascular disease, is having a high pressure within the vasculature.
Yeah.
So again, or anything that can reduce blood pressure and other risks is going to be beneficial.
Yeah. So do you want to move on to the next?
What is the next one?
So the next one is improvement in blood lipid profile.
Yeah, so we were looking into when you go without food, like we said, you classed it as a fasted state. At what point do you then use up your glycogen, which is the primary source once you're in the fasted state? And when do you go to fats? And then eventually proteins if you're in too much of a fast. And then we seen one saying 8 to 10 hours is when you start using, well, you've used all your glycogen stores. Yeah. And then we've seen 12 to 14 hours.
Yeah, and then I've seen one 12 to 36 hours as well, which was on a different study. So I think it's very vast in terms of, like, I think it's individual. So how much someone stores glycogen is individual to that person. Whether genetics play a part, I'm presuming that they will do. But I think sort of about 14 hours was maybe about in the middle of, or not in the middle, but maybe around about where, well, a lot of the studies are saying there is a benefit.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
I'd say 12.
12 is okay.
I'm looking at 12 because of practicality, but yeah, definitely the more you leave it, the more you're going to oxidize fats.
Yeah.
There is a way we can look at it, respiratory quotient, but you're not going to do that at home.
Yeah. How would you do that? Do you know?
I'm guessing, it's got to be in a lab. I think it's going to be similar to a VO2 max test in terms of what rate of oxygen and carbon dioxide are being produced. You can have a look at what fuel source you're using at that one point. The higher the oxygen, so a value of 1 is carbohydrates, 0.7s, you use more fats.
Yeah.
So this is how it goes on to improving your lipid profile, is that if you intermittent fast and you've exhausted your glycogen stores, you then go to fatty acids as an energy source. Mm-hmm. The idea then is via beta oxidation, normally occurs within the liver, or can do, you are then making ketone bodies to go into the citric acid cycle, make energy. You're pulling away fat. Yeah. So your liver is not going to be exporting it. Yeah. Because we need it for energy. Mm-hmm. So if you are not exporting it, you're not increasing ApoB via VLDL. Mm-hmm. And when we looked at the studies on intermittent fasting, it was showing it as like a positive feedback mechanism, which is different. So anyone who looks into health and medicine, a lot of things in the body, if you produce more of something, it sort of tells the initial proprietor, whatever you want to call it, to stop producing it. Yeah. But in this case, it was stimulating its own production to increase the rate of beta oxidation. Yeah,
so basically increase the rate of us using fat or utilising fat as an energy source. Yeah. We did discuss then at what point does it then start to use muscle or protein as its energy source. So that would be interesting to find out later on down the line.
But that's a good point, what you made earlier. If you are going to fast for prolonged periods, so greater than a day, I think, especially if you're on certain medication, and in general, because then your endocrine system comes in and there's glucagon, insulin are all changing, cortisol, all these hormones are changing.
It's a very stressful thing to do to the body, is to fast for a time period such as that. So I definitely would seek advice if you're doing it for any longer than 24 hours, really, to be honest.
Yeah. There are clinical benefits to doing so in certain patients, and it has been termed as medical bariatric.
Yeah, I think we've listened to podcasts this week, and you've read studies where they'll do maybe 7-day fasts and completely reverse type 2 diabetes. However, it's in a specialist centre, it's done under supervision, which is definitely what they need to do, because then, like I said before, with refeeding, it means then you have to then slowly introduce certain foods over the next 7 days to then not get all the electrolyte imbalances that come with refeeding. So that would definitely be under supervision of a specialist. I also read as well to do with lowering lipids and lipid metabolism was that if you intermittent fast, it also increases the LDL particle size. So if you remember, if anyone's listened to us from way back, if you have a bigger LDL particle size, so LDL is the bad cholesterol in quote unquote, which can get stuck in our arteries to cause atherosclerosis. Now, the bigger the particle, the harder it is to actually get lodged within an artery to cause the build-up of a plaque. And so if intermittent fasting increases the particle size, less likely to be lodged within an artery, and so decreases your risk of atherosclerosis. So that was another way as to how intermittent fasting affects cardiovascular health.
Yeah. I mean, we did go into the actual schematics of it. Yeah. There were things that I've never seen before. No. JM DJ3. I don't even know what it was. There was PPAR alphas.
Yeah.
It was such a complex system.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of actually the way that intermittent fasting works in the lipid metabolism and the metabolism of cholesterol is where medications work as well. So I think it said that a statin can reduce your cholesterol levels by 40%.
Depending on what statin is,
yeah. So like high dose, like statin. Whereas intermittent fasting was shown, was it like 22% to about 30-something% potentially in some cohorts of patients? So obviously that's not going to happen for everybody, but it shows that it can be quite significant. But the general consensus is that it showed a reduction in total cholesterol, it showed a reduction in LDL cholesterol, so like I just said, the bad cholesterol, triglycerides, and then also some studies showed an increase in HDL cholesterol.
It did. And that was due to, well, it was a lack of expression of cholesterol ester transfer protein.
Yes, it was.
That study,
yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah, which then transfers the cholesterol esters from HDL particles to VLDLs and go to the liver in a secondary pathway.
Yeah. If anyone obviously wants to know any more in depth of the cholesterol pathway and was to explain it in the best way possible, then drop us a message. But I think it's very complex. We're not going to go into it into the podcast, but just the take-home point of that is that studies show that there is an improvement in blood lipid profile on most studies when you do intermittent fast.
And it makes sense again. Yeah. And then if you actually look at all the processes within fasting, I think it all stems from the fact that we're not stimulating insulin, because insulin increases de novo lipogenesis. Yeah. So if it's not there, you can break it down.
Yeah.
There's no trigger to store fat.
Yeah. And we say this a lot on the podcast as well in terms of what were our ancestors doing for hundreds of thousands of years.
That's a good point.
We were not constantly fed. We did go through bouts of, fasting and famine and so our bodies are not designed to just have an abundance of energy all of the time and just keep on, eating. So I think, genetically and it does make sense.
It does. I mean, when you look back in history, and we were looking at it the other day in terms of why did we develop this ability to store fat, and it was when we sort of migrated from African countries to Europe where it was colder, less food abundance, and then we lost the enzymes, then didn't we uricase, and it sort of went down that route.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've never been in abundance in such large numbers in the population than we ever have in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And it's obviously causing havoc, isn't it, in terms of cardiovascular disease?
Yeah. Okay, so that was blood lipids and cholesterol, so how intermittent fasting can affect that. So then another way in terms of how intermittent fasting can affect cardiovascular risk is by the reduction of in inflammation.
Okay.
So inflammation and low-grade inflammation, chronic inflammation, all of those sort of sayings are very popular at the moment, aren't they? And they're quite big buzzwords for
social media,
and on social
of course.
Media. So yeah, we know that we do in the Western society especially suffer with sort of chronic low-grade inflammation, which is a contributor to things like cardiovascular disease. We think metabolic syndrome, obesity, high blood pressure. So what is going on? So one of the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Mechanisms, yeah, by which this chronic low-grade inflammation comes about is because we get this condition called leaky gut. So you may have heard of it. The reason being, or it's thought to be the reason, is because we, as a Western society, eat foods that are not beneficial to our gut microbiome. Our gut microbiome is involved, or one of its roles that it plays is to repair the gut lining. So actually Zoe recently came out with a study where they found certain bacteria that come of a night time when we're not in a fed state, and they come and sort of clean up, don't they, where they repair anything that's happened to the gut lining, which reduces this leaky gut. So one of those bacteria is called Alobacter. So Alobacter is a genus of bacteria basically that we've got in our gut. If we intermittent fast, it increases the levels of this bacteria. So it produces short-chain fatty acids such as butyrate, and they are involved in maintaining this intestinal barrier. So if the intestinal barrier is not maintained, it allows what we call lipopolysaccharides to enter our blood system. And these are endotoxins, basically. They're produced by species of bacteria. And if we obviously are allowing them to pass into the blood, it produces an inflammatory response. It produces cytokines, and this is where we get this chronic low-grade inflammation. And so it's important that we are maintaining the epithelial lining.
Yeah, and atherosclerosis, as we know, is an inflammatory condition because it's endothelial dysfunction. So if we are going to reduce low-grade chronic inflammation, that's going to improve that.
Yeah. So basically, intermittent fasting was increasing the amount of these bacteria that, do help with the repairing of the gut lining. There was also other mechanisms. Again, if you want us to explain any, then we're more than happy to. It's just that it's very intricate science, and it's very detailed science. It's very, it's in-depth science, but really interesting. But yeah, so I think, as with everything that we always say, the gut microbiome plays a pivotal role in almost everything that we always talk about, and it's so important that we're increasing the amount of plants and prebiotics that we're eating so that we are allowing our gut microbiome to flourish, and then also practicing intermittent fasting in order to increase the amount of good, well, it's not good bacteria, but more beneficial bacteria to us.
Yeah, and you've got to give your body a rest. If you think about it practically anyway, you shouldn't really be in a fed state for the whole day.
Yeah.
And definitely in Western cultures, a lot of people, I think on average, will be in 16 hours in a fed state, probably even more if they just eat before bed.
Yeah.
The body's not meant to be constantly stimulating growth, especially in adults. That's where a lot of diseases are coming from. It's this stimulation for growth. And I was saying to you, when I started going into, I wouldn't say bodybuilding because I'm not, or I wasn't, but definitely when I took weight training more seriously, there was this idea that you needed to always keep protein within your system, food, eat meals 6 times a day, and then before you go to bed, have a long-acting, protein source. And when you look at it now, it just seems so stupid.
Yeah.
And I don't know who gave me that advice, or it was just a consensus in the gym that you would go to.
Although I think it's good advice if you want to build muscle, because you're constantly spiking insulin, and so you're in this anabolic state. But
from the health side,
for a health point of view, it can't be beneficial.
It can't be.
Yeah.
Because if that's the case, why would we have not done it years ago?
Yeah.
That's my point. And we've got such an abundance.
Yeah, it's quite funny actually, because when we're actually researching these podcasts, we just speak about it constantly, don't we? And the conversations that we have, we probably should start recording them, because...
Oh, I know. I mean, we listened to Peter Attia's podcast, I think, with Dr. Jason Fung, was it? So he's a nephrologist. He was talking about intermittent fasting 5 years ago, and the whole thesis around diabetes management and how radical it's changed that area. The podcast is 2 hours. And I think it took us 3 days to listen to it, because we kept on interrupting it, going off and listening to all these other things. And we're just constantly adding to what we know. Yeah. And they made a good point, is that when you look at all these other dietary modifications, because we've sort of agreed, apart from me last week where I said exercise is the most important thing, nutrition is probably the most fundamental aspect of any healthy lifestyle in prevention of disease, especially cardiovascular. Yeah. And the easiest thing to tell someone is when to eat and when not to eat. Yeah. When you say, reduce your carbohydrates, eat this proportion of monounsaturated fats, that is a complex thing to adhere to. And I think that Dr. Fung, I hope I'm saying his name right, he alluded to it because he'd done a study within a Southeast Asian population and said, we want to carbohydrate restrict you. Yeah. And they kept on eating rice. But ironically, that was their culture, and they didn't see that was a carbohydrate. Yeah. So it skewed all the results. Mm-hmm. But telling someone you eat from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m, that is your window.
Although I'm presuming that you can't just eat whatever you want within that 8-hour window. It has to be good quality food.
Well, that's why a lot of studies might not show the benefits of fasting, because, again, there was one study that you brought up at the beginning. I think it was a 20,000 patient cohort study. That was actually the headline published in the media.
It's actually probably quite good to actually sort of go back to that. So let me just go back to what it said. So it said that an 8-hour time restricted eating was linked to a 91% higher risk of cardiovascular death. Now, when we started looking at this podcast, I did type that into Google. I typed in intermittent fasting and cardiovascular disease, and that was the first thing that came up. Okay. And it was like, whoa, I was really shocked, because you think that intermittent fasting would be beneficial. However, when you then read the actual study that the article was taken from, then it's probable that it's not the case. Yeah. And that's
so I think the
fake news.
Yeah, the timeline it was done from, I think, was 2003 to 2018. Now, back in 2003, I don't think time-restricted eating was known in the population. It was just, you just didn't eat.
Yeah.
That was it. So when you actually look at it, and then they got asked to record what they ate in retrospect. Again,
you can't. You didn't remember fully, do you? Something.
No, and when you ask certain people, we've said this before with food studies, they just completely exaggerate what they have or haven't eaten.
Yeah.
So I just think it completely skews all the results. I mean, if you look at the population, it could have been someone was asked to fast, for example, because they were going for surgery the next day. They were already unhealthy.
Yeah.
People could have been fasting because, I mean, I've got family members who smoke, so they don't really eat. So it's classed as a fast, but I wouldn't say they're healthy. And that goes back to that point you've just said. You need to have a good balanced diet for the time that you are eating.
Yeah.
Because fasting, not eating, and then going to break the fast with poor habits is just going to be fundamentally wrong for your body. Yeah. It's not going to get any nutrition, no sources to function on any level whatsoever. Yeah. And yeah, that's a good point. That there's not many studies, I don't think, where you can categorically say this is being beneficial.
No, I don't think
100% that is, I mean,
there ever will be. Like we say, the only way that we would ever do it is if we basically reared people to just be lab rats basically, which is so inhumane that it would never happen. So unless you did that and you put people in very controlled environments for many, many years, then we would never categorically be able to say if something was beneficial or not. And that's why we have all the statistics and that we use and Mendelian randomization, where we can sort of determine whether something is statistically significant or not, and that's what we base all of our evidence off, isn't it?
It is, and people need to understand that we use these 95% confidence intervals. So what that means in practice is there is still 5% chance of it being down to something else. Mm-hmm. But in reality, we put our eggs in a basket if something's more likely to happen. And that's why science changes. Mm-hmm. So smoking was a big one, wasn't it? It was healthy for you. Yeah. Studies come out, well, actually it's not, because it was down to that percentage of chance. Yeah. Going back to the study that led this whole podcast, when you actually put together all the things we discussed, so it lowers your weight, lowers blood pressure, lowers your lipid profile for the better, in my opinion, and then reduces chronic inflammation. How could all of them things together in the short term increase your cardiovascular risk? Mm-hmm. It makes no sense.
No, it doesn't.
So I think from what I've read anyway is that was just publicised by the media. Again, it got a lot of clicks. It got a lot of people doing reviews on it on YouTube and podcasts. Yeah. But in my opinion, going back to the evidence, I think a 12-hour fasting window is quite practical. Yeah. And when you fast, that is, in my opinion, something where you don't spike insulin. So if you are having a coffee and it's got milk in, that's a spike for me. Yeah. So that's not classed as fasting. So we're going to do, well, going forward. I know
I was going to say, I'm presuming that means you're going to carry on doing it, or you're going to implement it in your lifestyle.
I'm definitely going to do 12 hours.
Yeah, I think same. I definitely, I used to snack a lot, to be honest. I used to be really horrendous, and I'd love, like, over night time to, like, sit and have, like, a packet of crisps. I don't tend to do it that much anymore. And I think that is down to a lot of the fact that we've changed our diet, and we do eat a better diet now than we ever have. So I don't think we get as much cravings to eat late on into the night anyway. So, like I say, we do sort of intermittent fast. The only thing that we don't do, or the only reason why we potentially may not intermittent fast, would be to do with a coffee of a morning. So the only thing that we now need to do is just bring our eating window slightly a bit forward or back so that we will do it. And I agree. I think I'll definitely be incorporating it into our lifestyle.
Well, if you follow good habits anyway, it makes it easier. So for example, if you get your 8 hours of sleep, you'd only then consciously in a fasted state for 4 hours if you do 12 and 12. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to bring up is religion. So there's a lot of history with a lot of different religions fasting. Yeah. You've got Catholics, well, Muslims is a big one, and because they have studied Ramadan. Yeah. And I looked at it and there was no significance in health benefits from what I've read. Okay. But when you actually look at it, so the normal fast is 30 days, give or take, and it's daylight hours you fast. Yeah. And then you eat. I think you eat your first meal of the day before daylight. Yeah. And then your last meal basically once nighttime starts. Yeah. So in the summer, let's say, what's sunrise, 5 o'clock?
Yeah, and then it
goes till 10 o'clock. Yeah. Is it?
Yeah.
give or take. So you've got like a 6-hour window to sleep, eat.
We had friends, didn't we, who would get up or like be up till like 2 a.m. in the morning eating with family and then go to sleep for a couple of hours and then be up again to eat and then go back to sleep. So it's really disruptive if it's in that period of time.
Exactly. So my point that I'm going to make is a lot of the benefits that may have been observed through fasting has been negated because you're not able to sleep.
Yeah.
Because obviously people in these cultures are eating and staying awake to try and maximise how much they can eat, and then they're probably getting 3-4 hours sleep.
I did actually find studies that did say where they studied people doing Ramadan that there was an improvement in lipid profile.
Okay.
But whether, again, it could have been in the winter, so the fasting window was larger. Would it be larger? It would be. In terms
winter?
of like they would be able to eat.
The feeding window's larger.
Sorry. So it could have been then, and then obviously they're getting more sleep because the sun doesn't rise until in this country sometimes 9 o'clock in the morning, and then does so. But anyway, I did find some studies, but again, it's like everything in science. If you find one study for something, there is always going to be something to suggest otherwise or the opposite. So
it is. But from a practical point of view, I think it can't not work. Yeah. Reducing the hormone insulin in your body is beneficial, in my opinion. We're not meant to be stimulating growth to the extent that we do. I know, ironically, we are still trying to build muscle, but then we're trying to find this balance at the moment of what's beneficial for function and beneficial for
overall health,
cardiovascular health. I don't think it's what we think it is, which is high muscle mass. I don't think it is.
No.
I know there's studies out, and this is a bit off topic, where mortality's been positively correlated to high muscle mass or higher muscle mass. But I think that's because in general, these people tend to have a healthier lifestyle than others.
Yeah.
But yeah. I'm going to do 12 and 12 and then see what that happens over the next 3 months, get my bloods done, HbA1c, see if it comes down, lipid profile, and then if I've got scope to, I would push the boundaries a bit more.
Sounds good. I think I live with you, so I'll do the same.
You do all the cooking.
I cook everything, so...
But I would advise anyone who's thinking about it, I think it's safe to do a 12-hour fast in a lot of people.
Yeah.
This is not advice, by the way, as is all the things we say. It's informational purposes only. Yeah. Good time to plug it. Yeah. And you should always see a medical professional if you are considering certain things to your health.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's much risk to it. I think it's just a good practice anyway. Give your body a rest.
Yeah.
Because we do that in all other aspects of our life. If we didn't sleep for a while, you would start to see the effects, wouldn't you? Yeah. And I think your gut and everything else in your body is the same.
Yeah. So I think we've come to the end of the podcast. So thank you so much to anyone who's got this far. Thanks for listening. Next week, we potentially may be discussing caffeine and its role that it plays in the cardiovascular system, whether that provides a beneficial effect in cardiovascular disease, with it being the number one psychoactive compound that we consume in the world.
It is.
So, we look forward to doing that one. And like I say, thanks for listening.
Thank you.